Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Chenjerai Kumanyika, sitting in for Robert Jensen. He's an assistant professor of communication studies at Clemson University. Hi, Chenjerai.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well, thanks for joining us. The Red Cross has warned that the humanitarian situation in war-torn Yemen is reaching catastrophic proportions. The U.S.-Saudi war against Houthi rebels who took over the Gulf Arab nation has made it impossible for aid delivery to civilians by sea, and news reports indicate that land transport of aid is being held up by rebel groups. Red Cross spokeswoman Marie-Claire Fegali said, quote, "It's a catastrophe, a humanitarian catastrophe." Meanwhile, U.S. nuclear talks with Iranian leaders continue in New York this week. Secretary of State John Kerry has indicated that external concerns such as Iran's role in northern Iraq in the fight against ISIS and its role in ostensibly supporting Houthis in Yemen may arise during the talk. Now, Chenjerai, could there be mass starvation in Yemen as a result of this U.S.-Saudi war?
Absolutely. And this is really, underscoring the importance of trying to find a political solution here. It is indeed Houthis who are leading the rebellion, but there are a wide variety of parties who have been displaced by the transitional government and feel that this government has failed them. And so this is really should underscore the fact that the U.S. has to begin to deal with Yemen as more than kind of like a political chess piece. The U.S. has been happy to support military actions in Yemen for a long time. And of course, Saudi Arabia has tremendous motivation to sort of heighten and exaggerate the evidence that to the extent to which Iran is actually involved in Yemen. We're not sure of that. They're clearly sympathetic. So I think to simply frame all Houthis and Iranians as dangerous enemies and then bomb the country into oblivion is not the solution here. We need a political solution and eventually humanitarian aid.
And Indonesia is on the verge of carrying out a mass execution this week. 9 people stand accused of various charges of drug trafficking. Indonesia's government, citing a tough war on drugs approach, has sentenced them to death by firing squad. 8 of the 9 are foreign citizens, including people from Nigeria, the Philippines, Brazil, and Australia. Some of the convicts say they were offered lighter sentences in exchange for bribes by the judge. Indonesia's judicial system is notoriously corrupt. The planned executions have seriously strained diplomatic ties with foreign governments, some of whom send aid to Indonesia. The UN has also expressed condemnation. Already, ambulances carrying coffins have arrived at the island of Nusa Kambangan off of the coast of Java, where the prisoners are being held. The death sentences are scheduled for tomorrow morning. Earlier in the year, Indonesia executed 5 people on drug-related charges. Well, Chenjerai, the U.S. has historically allied with Indonesia. Earlier this year, there were plans to strengthen U.S.-Indonesia military ties, but President Obama has been pretty silent on this issue, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. And we can only wonder if that's because many of the countries who are already condemning Indonesia don't have spotless human rights records in and of themselves, Australia being a primary figure in that regard. Now, but I think the main issue despite that is executing these prisoners really going to help the Indonesian drug problem in a significant or lasting way? And I think that, there's people who have pointed to the fact that this solution is maybe politically convenient, and that maybe even in some respects, the idea of like a drug emergency in Indonesia has been exacerbated a little bit by kind of playing with statistics and figures. So, I think it's a complex situation.
And finally, here in the United States, the trial of mass shooter James Holmes has begun this week with little fanfare. Holmes stands accused of fatally shooting 12 people and injuring 70 at a Colorado movie theater 3 years ago. He's pled not guilty on grounds of insanity. His defense is painting a picture of a conflicted man struggling with schizophrenia when the shooting occurred. But much more attention has been focused on the sentencing phase of the Dzhokhar Tsarnaev trial. The Boston Marathon bombing, for which Tsarnaev was found guilty on all counts, resulted in 3 dead and 264 injured. Tsarnaev is being painted as an unrepentant terrorist, and there's an ongoing media debate on whether he should receive the death penalty versus life in prison. Chenjerai, do you see double standards in these 2 trials? A white man with a gun is not seen as a terrorist, whereas a Muslim immigrant with radical views is.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, time and time again, we see white Americans who murder many people being dealt with without really dealing with the political and racial context of their acts. And then when it's immigrants who have any affiliation with Islam, the mental health context of their acts tend to be ignored. And this continues despite reports that the majority of terrorism in the United States has been executed by extreme white left-wing groups. This is not an argument, I think, for the
Right.
death penalty at all. I think the strongest case we have, according to some polls, twice as many voters support the sentencing scenario to life in prison than those that support the death penalty. In addition, the Roman Catholic bishops of Massachusetts condemned the death penalty, is basically using the argument that killing is wrong. We haven't seen the defense use those kind of arguments just yet, but yeah, I think there's definitely a double standard.
Chenjerai, thanks as always for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you.
Chenjerai Kumanyika is an assistant professor of communication studies at Clemson University, sitting in for Robert Jensen. We'll be right back.